The roaring from the debt collection calls still echoed in my ears. If you don't pay up, prepare to collect a corpse, and we'll sell you to a black workshop in Miami. I heard these vicious threats countless times a day. At first, I'd tremble with fear, my heart filled with panic. Later, I grew numb, resigning myself to despair. Sometimes I'd even beg them over the phone, just do it already. After hanging up, there was no time to calm my racing heart. I had to summon all my energy to revise the presentation I'd already edited 12 times, just to deal with a nitpicky client. I had no formal job. My 8th grade education was an insurmountable barrier. Nowadays, even entry-level positions at most companies required at least an associate degree. To make matters worse, my credit score had plummeted to rock bottom, landing me on the blacklists of numerous financial institutions. Fortunately, I was quick-witted. I taught myself video editing and presentation formatting through free tutorials on YouTube. After mastering these skills, I took odd jobs on platforms like Fiverr. Thanks to my fast turnaround, low prices, and easygoing attitude, I barely managed to make ends meet. I even had a glorious record, charging $50 to edit 30 versions of a 5-minute video for a client. Just as I was left with only 2 pages to revise in the presentation, the client I'd noted as idiot sent me 5 or 6 60-second voice messages. He casually asked me to design a logo for him, told me to fix his error-ridden proposal on the side, and even demanded I add project background information, conduct industry research, and write a competitor analysis, acting as if I could just copy information from the internet and paste it in. I held back my anger, replied patiently, and reminded him that we'd agreed upfront I'd only handle content formatting and page optimization, not revisions to the actual content. But he persisted in sending long voice messages, completely unaware of how unreasonable his requests were. Taking a deep breath, I set down my mouse and decided to go outside for some fresh air. Before I knew it, I'd walked to Aunt Martha's grave. As usual, I sat down to greet her, rambling on about all the terrible things that had happened lately. I lived in a trailer on the outskirts of Virginia, near Arlington National Cemetery. A narrow yard was built with plywood, where I'd planted a small vegetable patch, and 2 blueberry bushes grew by the door. I worked as a caretaker at a private cemetery, earning $1,200 a month, with utilities and accommodation included, but no food. The reason I'd ended up like this was all thanks to Jason, my biological older brother. If I'd had a choice, I would have rather never been born. Jason was 8 years older than me. When I was in middle school, he met some so-called buddies outside and soon got hooked on drugs and gambling. He squandered all the family's savings, sold our house and car, and then started borrowing money from underground lenders. By the time the debt collectors showed up at our door, he'd already vanished without a trace. The debt collectors said Jason owed them $1.2 million. If we didn't pay, they'd break his hands and shatter his legs. When my mom heard that, she fainted on the spot. Of course, my dad couldn't bear to see his precious son suffer. He pushed me, who was hiding in the corner, forward, then said something I'd never forget for the rest of my life. My daughter is 13, and she's very pretty. He brushed aside my messy hair, forced me to show my face, and smiled obsequiously at the debt collectors. Can she pay off the debt instead? The debt collectors were probably new to the job, they'd never seen such a scene before. After a moment of stunned silence, they said they didn't want a person, only money. As soon as they left, my dad asked around for advice. People told him that the exorbitant interest rates from underground lenders weren't legally enforceable, but we still had to repay the principal. He went to great lengths to contact his precious son, and asked how much principal Jason actually owed. Jason replied brazenly that he'd borrowed money from 30 or 40 lending companies, couldn't remember the exact amount, and that it was probably around $400,000. My dad really did try to get rid of me. He asked around to see who wanted to adopt a child, and even contacted farmers in remote areas. If the law hadn't been so strict, he would have probably sold me to human traffickers outright. It would have been quick money with no future troubles. My mom came up with a brilliant idea: run and hide. To avoid being found, she and my dad secretly moved what little was left in the house. When the debt collectors showed up again, all that remained was an empty house, and me, who'd just come back from boarding school for Christmas break, only to be abandoned. Luckily, they didn't make things hard for me. One of the younger men even took pity on me, and went out to buy me a hamburger and 2 bottles of cola. You have to understand, this house was rented, our real house had long been sold to pay Jason's debts. Washington's winters were freezing enough to turn a person stiff. I had nowhere to go, so I clung stubbornly to staying in that empty house. The landlord showed up after hearing about what happened. It turned out my parents had not only emptied the house of all furniture and appliances, but also owed him 2 months' rent. The landlord screamed and cursed at the empty house, while I huddled in the corner, too scared to make a sound. Fortunately, the old lady had a kind heart in the end. She didn't hit me, and even cursed my worthless parents on my behalf. She just gave me a sharp glare, threw me $200 as she left, and told me to get out immediately. Just when I was at the end of my rope, Aunt Martha, who collected scrap for a living, found me beside a trash can and took me in. With Aunt Martha, at least I had something to eat. Though I didn't get a rags to riches story and knew deep down that education could change one's fate, I had no way to turn my life around in that kind of situation. My grades plummeted, and I fell further into despair. Jason owed money to too many underground lenders, and not all of them were as kind as those first few. When they couldn't find Jason or my parents, they started waiting for me outside my school every now and then, seriously disrupting other students. At the start of the new semester, I couldn't afford tuition. Plus, because of me, a bunch of gangsters lingered outside the school gates every day. Naturally, the school wouldn't let me continue studying there. To escape those men, Aunt Martha took me south to Richmond. Richmond's winters weren't as cold. Aunt Martha found a job as a caretaker at a private cemetery. It was the family burial ground of a wealthy clan, with nearly 30 graves in total. She and I went to clean it once a week. The family lived in Europe and rarely came back, but during holidays like Thanksgiving and Christmas, they'd send extra money for us to pay respects on their behalf. With the money she'd saved, Aunt Martha bought me a pile of second-hand books, all kinds of books, textbooks, philosophical works, world classics, detective novels, and even a few books on Python programming. She couldn't afford to send me to school, so this was her way of making sure I learned more and didn't end up illiterate. After Aunt Martha passed away, the family sent someone to handle her funeral and buried her not far from the cemetery. I became the sole caretaker. 2 years later, the family returned to the country on business and made a special trip to visit the cemetery. They hadn't notified me in advance, but when they arrived, they found the entire ground spotless, with no sign of neglect. Even the tombstones were polished until they shone. The lady of the family looked at me, thin and tanned, and burst into tears on the spot. She asked if there was anything I wanted. Timidly, I asked if they had an old computer they didn't use, and if they could give it to me, so I could learn new things. To my surprise, she not only bought me a new computer, but also had an internet connection installed, and even gave me a new phone. Part of the money I saved was automatically deducted to repay debts, and the rest went toward covering my basic living expenses. That day, I had just sat down at Aunt Martha's grave when my phone pinged with a text message. The sender claimed to be Elias, an oncologist at George Washington University Hospital. He said my brother had been seriously injured in a car accident, and was still in critical condition. At the time of the accident, Jason had saved Elias's younger sister, and the whole family was grateful. He was contacting me to discuss follow-up treatment and claiming compensation from the drunk driver. After reading the text, I deleted it without a second thought. This scam was way too cliched. Besides, how could Jason ever save someone? He'd be more likely to push someone in front of danger to save himself. The fact that they were being so polite and playing on emotions meant they weren't the underground lenders I'd dealt with before, probably just scammers. But to convince me, he even sent me several MMS messages, one of his hospital office, one of Jason's intensive care unit, ICU, medical record, and a selfie. The man in the photo wore gold-rimmed glasses, looked refined and gentle, fitting all my fantasies of a highly educated intellectual. Only his complexion wasn't great, and there was tiredness in the corners of his eyes. Had scammers really become so competitive that they even took real-life photos now? I didn't reply, so he called me. I'd just been wronged by my client and was dying to vent. If I couldn't yell at the client, yelling at a scammer should be fine, right? But before I could hurl a single curse word, the man on the other end had already introduced himself clearly and concisely. Elias had a deep, pleasant voice, with a magical ability to calm people down. Almost instinctively, I swallowed all the swear words I'd been about to say. But I still didn't believe him. In a flash of inspiration, I thought of a perfect way to verify his identity. I told him to wait, then ran all the way back to my trailer. I stood on my bed to reach a book on top of the cabinet. It was a thick medical popular science book Aunt Martha had picked up while collecting scrap. The content was too obscure and boring for me to read carefully, but I remembered one section was about tumors. After flipping to that page, I asked Elias, "Can you tell me what the 5 tumor marker tests include?" He clearly hadn't expected me to ask something like that, but he recovered quickly and answered seriously. His answer matched exactly what was in the book. He even added some extra explanations, though I didn't understand most of them. I asked a few more questions, and he answered each one immediately. Embarrassed, I closed the book and apologized to him. "It's okay, I understand your caution," Elias said gently. "Now can we talk about your brother's situation?" As for why he'd contacted me instead of my parents, they'd long since disappeared, as if they'd vanished from the face of the earth. Elias bought me a Greyhound bus ticket to Washington for the next day, and said he'd pick me up. I rarely went out, so I rummaged through my things to find an outfit that was somewhat presentable, a red knit sweater and a pair of baggy sweatpants. When I arrived at the station, I followed the signs to the exit and spotted Elias standing there at a glance. He was even more handsome in person than in the photo, broad shoulders, a narrow waist, and long legs. He wore a crisp shirt and trousers. I couldn't tell the brand, but they looked expensive. I tried to smooth out the wrinkles on my shirt hem, walked up to him, and greeted him. Elias was slightly taken aback when he saw me, but his good manners made him quickly hide his curious gaze. "Ella, right? Hello, I'm Elias." He took the faded canvas bag from my hand gently, then walked with me to the parking lot, keeping a distance of about 2 fists between us. The canvas bag was stuffed full. Apart from 1 or 2 changes of clothes, the rest was all blueberries I'd picked from my bushes. He opened the passenger door for me, and I got in and fastened my seat belt. The seat angle wasn't quite right, but I didn't know how to adjust it, and didn't dare to try. I had to hunch over for the entire ride. When we went over a speed bump, I hugged the bag tightly, but it jostled, and most of the blueberries spilled out, rolling under the passenger seat. I was so flustered I almost cried, but Elias stopped me from bending down to pick them up. "The road's bumpy right now, be careful not to hit your head." "It's okay, no rush. These blueberries are huge, and the color's beautiful." "Did you grow them yourself?" "I did," I said quietly. "I wanted to bring them as an apology. I shouldn't have almost yelled at you on the phone." "You can grow fruit too?" "That's amazing," Elias said softly. "I'll definitely try them later." A young girl should have a sense of vigilance. I'm not angry. Elias booked me a room at a hotel near the hospital. I secretly checked the price on my phone, $2.50 a night. My heart ached thinking about it. I thought to myself, if I could just have that money directly, I'd be willing to sleep on a park bench. After sorting out my accommodation, Elias took me to the hospital to see Jason. Jason was lying in the ICU, covered in tubes. I felt no sadness or sorrow. If anything, I couldn't help but want to laugh. Karma really does come around. I even had a dark thought: should I pretend to have a close relationship with Jason? Would that make Elias's family feel more guilty? Could I get more benefits from them? But when I stood at the door, tears streamed down my face uncontrollably, not for Jason, but for having such a dirty thought. I remembered Aunt Martha teaching me that people should have a conscience and bottom lines. But I couldn't help but think, what's the use of having a conscience and bottom lines? Has fate ever been kind to me? My tears clearly flustered Elias. The sympathy and guilt in his eyes grew even stronger. That guilt reached its peak when Jason died despite all rescue efforts. Later, I watched the video of the accident scene. 5 or 6 people were crossing the road. Jason and Elias's younger sister, Lillian, were walking in the middle. Suddenly, an out-of-control truck ran a red light and rushed toward them. Jason pushed Lillian away. She stumbled and fell. Luckily, she landed in a safe spot and only suffered minor injuries. Jason, however, was thrown several meters away. Another man was also badly hit. Elias's family was convinced Jason was a hero who'd saved Lillian's life. Coincidentally, Elias was the same age as Jason, and I was the same age as Lillian. This coincidence added a touch of tragic fate to the accident. But only I knew the truth. Jason had only pushed the person blocking his way out of instinct. In the end, he'd finally done a good deed. At least his death had meant something. I knew well that mixing a little truth with lies could make the lies seem real. When I sat on the sofa in the Carlin family's villa, I sobbed as I made up a story. My parents had borrowed usury, my brother and I had relied on each other, and I'd dropped out of school early to work and earn money. Though I acted poor, I also showed integrity. I said I only wanted the compensation the drunk driver owed, and refused the Carlins' reward money. When my eyes welled up with tears, I looked up at Mrs. Carlin, my voice trembling with vulnerability. Lillian is about my age. I think my brother must have been happy when he saved her. My tears fell like broken beads, hitting the polished marble floor. The chandelier above cast light, turning the tear stains into tiny glistening spots. With my actions I was telling them, because of your daughter, your sister, I lost my only brother. Mrs. Carlin had lived a life of luxury, never having suffered hardship. She still had a naive, excessive kindness. She hugged me and said she wanted to adopt me as her goddaughter. She said adopting one more person, even 100 more, would be easy for the Carlin family. As long as I didn't mess up, I'd live a life of wealth and comfort for the rest of my days. In that moment, I silently thanked Jason and decided to burn some paper money for him during Thanksgiving. I was good at reading people's expressions. Mr. Carlin and Elias didn't say anything, which amounted to agreeing with Mrs. Carlin's idea. But the way they looked at me held a subtle wariness that I could understand. The Carlin family wasn't an ordinary family. Suddenly adding a goddaughter would only bring unnecessary trouble and gossip. Mr. Carlin was a businessman. He had no reason to create hidden troubles for himself. I immediately declined the opportunity Mrs. Carlin offered. Wiping away my tears, I said, that would make my brother's heroic act seem tainted. But I also knew the truth. Jason had died saving Lillian. If they didn't settle my situation properly, the Carlin family would still face a public opinion storm.